Hello and welcome to Verum Fabula Fellowship Podcast. I'm Wes Mullins.
And I'm Randy Hardman, and we will be your hosts today. It is our goal to bring you content that cultivates and enriches your daily interactions and encourages the refinement of character and intellect. The terrain we cover ranges from literature to philosophy to theology. It is our hope that through these lenses we can offer insight to the human experience and the human condition that is empowering and transformative.
Verum Fabula Fellowship is located in the beautiful town of Wilmore, Kentucky, and the podcast takes place at Drinkling's Roastery on Main Street. This is also where the fellowship meets regularly and where members are encouraged to present new thoughts and ideas, engage with interesting and important topics in discussion seminars, and interact with and listen to keynote speakers invited in to challenge us intellectually and spiritually. It is a true intellectual collective. Please rate this podcast on iTunes, and if we've said things that are helpful, be sure to tell your Lewis and Tolkien friends about us. With no more ado, here we go. Further up and further in. Hello and welcome back to Verum Fabula Fellowship. I'm Wes Mullins. Our other fearless leader, Randy Hardman, is not here tonight, but he's with us in spirit and contention. All right, so we're still talking about transposition as we normally do. We go deep on these topics and wrestle them out, and we're not finished until we're finished. So we're going to jump into the transposition. I have it saved where our starting point is, so we won't be spending 20 minutes figuring out, hey, what are we doing? Were we here? No, I think we were here. And if we have our readers ready, we can jump into transposition because we're still not to the good part. We're still not to the good part.
I'm so anxiously waiting.
And that's kind of crazy because we've already hit so many good things. Mm-hmm. And so many good conversations have come out of this in my daily life about transposition. You really cannot get away from it. Mm-hmm. Can't get away from it. Yeah. Do we have any readers?
I could read. I can't read right at this moment, but I can. I just
All right, here we go. While Nina's getting ready, I will.
Do we have a book?
You want to use mine? Where are we? Page 100 maybe?
I'm on the PDF, so I don't know where. As the examples show is where we are.
I don't have a book with me.
It's right before he gets into his 2 points about. I will now make 2 comments. So we're the paragraph above that. As the examples show, we are all quite familiar with this kind of transposition or adaptation from a richer to a poorer medium. The most familiar example of all is the art of drawing. The problem here is to represent a three-dimensional world on a flat sheet of paper. The solution is perspective, and perspective means that we must give more than one value to a two-dimensional shape. Thus, in a drawing of a cube, we use an acute angle to represent what is a right angle in the real world. But elsewhere, an acute angle on paper may represent what was already an acute angle in the real world. For example, the point of a spear on the gable of a house. The very same shape which you must draw to give illusion of a straight road recedes from a spectator is also the shape you draw for a dunce's cap. As with the line, so with the shading. Your brightest light in the picture, in literal fact, only plain white paper. And this must do for the sun, or a lake in the evening light, or snow, or human flesh.
That's good stuff.
Can you read that again?
Yeah.
I can.
That's really
You want
good
me to
stuff.
read it again?
Something we went across my mind.
I have a lot of thoughts about this.
Yeah, I got stuck about halfway through on a thought, and I just kind of sat there with it.
Yeah.
So let's go again.
So we'll break it down this time.
You want me to read it?
As the examples show, we are quite all familiar with this kind of transposition or adaptation from a richer to a poorer medium. The most familiar example of this is the art of drawing. The problem here is to represent a three-dimensional world on a flat sheet of paper. The solution is perspective. And perspective means that we must give more than one value to a two-dimensional shape. Perspective. So it's impossible to get away from transpositional thinking once you start in on that art is communicative action. You are trying to express visually a thought or an idea or a symbol of something. But the medium in which you can do it, your conscious mind is not a one-dimensional or two-dimensional plane. It's a multi-dimensional plane. And you have to take that, and you have this medium of a piece of paper, and you have to express a multi-dimensional thought that has no limits or bounds in something that's limited and has bounds. So there's no way to get away from this thought. And so, and I actually said it's a simple proposition about perspective. And Lewis gives us an analogy here that is so clean and sharp that we need to be careful. It could cut us because it's so clean, it's so sharp about the drawing. It could actually draw blood. Thus, in a drawing of a cube, we use an acute angle to represent what is a right angle in the real world. But elsewhere, an acute angle on paper may represent what was already an acute angle in the real world. For example, the point of a spear on the gable of a house. The very same shape which you draw to give an illusion of a straight road receding from the spectator is also the shape you draw for a dunce's cap. So again, they were going with, there's more than one value given to an angle. It's just two lines up, but the symbology behind it, what it stands for, is multifaceted because it's perspective. It's our epistemology, right? And so we need to anchor our epistemology to ontology. So we have this, and so you see the road coming out, but I can also draw a line and write dunce on it, and it's the exact same shapes. But it has multiple meanings based on perspective and based on intention, right? Mm-hmm. We write an email, and emails are really hard to decipher a lot of times because we can't explain context or emotion through emails as well as we would like. Sometimes we write a sentence and it's poorly structured and someone gets offended and you're like, well, I didn't mean that. But it's really hard to get the context correct from even a lower medium, which is an email, because you're limited in what you can. There's nonverbal cues aren't there, and so you're missing something in that. So every time you go from a higher medium to a lower medium, you lose something in the translation, but you do the best that you can.
And even when it seems like you should be able to represent reality exactly the way it is, like in photography or videography, film, it does not look the same. Even like looking through the lens of a camera and then looking at the thing in real life, depending on how you frame it, depending on the light, it does not look the same. And thus,
especially with one of these.
Especially with one of those, yeah. And like even if you have like a 50 millimeter, which is arguably the closest to the human eye, you can put something in front of that and you can try to capture it. But the fact that, depending on exposure time and all this stuff, it adds into the kind of the differences. And then on top of that, you have like the artistic need to actually make the 2D image seem like it's deeper. Because especially in film, we often will look at a person as they are recorded live without any extra light on their face that contours the shape of their face, and we'll say the image looks flat, and all that means is that we don't have shadow on the face enough to really show us the depth, right? So then we create more shadow in order to show depth, and then we're making a new reality, and it's, you know, we can really turn it around on that. But it, like, the more, you know, even at the height of our representation, we're never there. Even if we're actually doing as close as we can with all today's technology. We can get into VR too, but I'm not going to go down that road.
It is clear that in each case what is happening in the lower medium can be understood only if we know the higher medium. The instance where this knowledge is most commonly lacking is the musical one. The piano version means one thing to the musician who knows the original orchestral score, and another thing to the man who hears it simply as a piano piece. But the second man would be at an even greater disadvantage if he had never heard any instrument but a piano, and even doubted the existence of other instruments.
So, something here, the instance where this knowledge is most commonly lacking is a musical one. The piano version means one thing to a musician who knows the original score, and another to a man who simply hears a piano piece. As I begin to look at this, it keeps coming back to me, this notion of priority of information, right? So we as humans are looking to create narratival conclusions on the world around us. We're looking to create stories that fill up our epistemology. We have this piece of information, this piece of information, this piece of information, beginning, middle, and end to something. And we go, okay, there, it's done. Okay, now I have this. Now what else can I put to it? And you attach to it, and you attach to it. And so the process is that you create a story of your life by employing the right information coming. So it's like Sherlock Holmes. He has to find the right clues. Once he finds the right clues, he has to put them in the correct order to come to the correct conclusion. If he gets any of that process wrong, the criminal goes free, or the motive isn't found, or the weapon isn't found, or somehow justice isn't served. So there is a priority of information. There is specific information that needs to be found and weighed and put into the proposition. This is my proposition. Here are my premises. Here's my conclusion. And if any one of those is incorrect in their structure, then the conclusion is false. And that's how it follows. So in our life, if we come to think that the piano piece is the only that is the true version of the song, we have lacked information, and that has actually limited our ability to understand the full proposition that this actually is a larger piece. It's from an entire orchestra, or concerto. And then what happens is he says that the man who thinks it's only a piano piece will also, at this point, because he doesn't have knowledge of it, will deny the existence of other instruments. So what I think what Lewis is doing here is he's pitting us, and willingly and intentionally, against a naturalistic framework that says only the lower exist. And because I only see the lower, therefore the higher cannot exist. And so he keeps bringing us back to this thing of, if you only think the lower exists, you can only come to the conclusion the lower only exists. But once you come to think about, well, how did the lower exist? And since there is a lower, and since I can understand these things, is there not something beyond? There's something that pulls me beyond. And so that causes us to look for the higher, right? The only reason we have science is because Newton and a lot of the early scientists knew that God created everything orderly, and he created everything, and so there was an intelligent mind behind it, so there must be more to look at. And so that's the reason why we even have science, is because they looked beyond. Naturalism couldn't have produced science because it only saw what was around it. It took someone looking beyond through imagination and through a higher medium, seeing it transpositional, that said, oh, there's more than this. So I think that's what he's getting at here.
And I think that kind of goes off of something that you're talking about with the Aristotle stuff. We were discussing that last week, this balance. Like, Aristotle looks at the world and he says there's this thing that we all want. In his words, happiness or flourishing. There's another way, I guess, to describe that. And he tries to set up a structure, a framework for us to be able to achieve that thing. But the underlying kind of transpositional element that sometimes I feel like he overlooks is the fact that why do we desire that? Because happiness, yes, can be fulfilled biologically, but there arguably you can assign that to biologies, like we want it because of our biology. But there are other parts of happiness that are not just biological desires, and that transpositionally translates to something else.
Right.
Yeah.
And then you start looking for that other thing. If you know that other instruments exist, you may be able to even imagine what a concert of instruments would sound like with this score, and begin to even reverse transposition it into something higher and even in more depth, and going, well, this run right here would sound really good on violins. I know how strings sound. I know their dynamics, and so this actually would sound better with this instrument. And so if you have knowledge that there are other instruments, suddenly you can't be limited by that, because you know that something more could exist and something deeper. And so that would take you further and go, oh, the piano is limited because it's just one instrument. There are hundreds of instruments. That means that this song could have more depth. just by having the priority, just by having information, just by having a larger epistemology, you're able to see the world more clearly. Having a more finely tuned epistemology that this is really hard to define, that is closer to ontological truths than not. And so that's going to get into really deep water. So, Ms. Mullins, if you would continue.
Even more?
Yeah.
Even more, we understand pictures only because we know and inhabit the three-dimensional world. If we can imagine a creature who perceived only 2 dimensions and yet could somehow be aware of the lines as he crawled over them on the paper, we shall easily see how impossible it would be for him to understand. At first, he might be prepared to accept on authority our assurance that there was a world in 3 dimensions. But when we pointed to the lines in the paper and tried to explain, say that this is a road, would he not reply the shape which we were asking him to accept as a revelation of our mysterious other world was the very same shape which, on our own showing elsewhere, meant nothing but a triangle? And soon, I think he would say, you keep on telling me of this other world and its unimaginable shapes, which you call solid, but isn't it very suspicious that all the shapes which you offer me as images or reflections of the solid ones turn out on inspection to be simply the old 2-dimensional shapes of my own world as I have always known it? Is it not obvious that your vaunted other world, so far from being the archetype, is a dream which borrows all its elements from this one?
Oh, man.
That is so good.
So it's like a hammer to the gut on that one.
That is so
Yeah, you can't. The more he talks, and the more he opens up the analogies and gives an analogy after analogy after analogy, you come to realize that there's no way that one could stare at a paper and say this is the world, because the moment you look up, there's more. You would have to be willfully ignorant to say this line is a road, because you step on it and it's not a road. Like it's logically impossible for that to be that. If we can imagine a creature perceived only 2 dimensions and yet could somehow be aware of the lines as they crawled over the paper, we shall easily see how impossible it would be for him to understand.
That takes me to another place too. Like, how can we even think we can imagine the depths of God's dimensions? Like,
I think this all the time. That right there.
Yeah, it's like how do we even think we have any clue at all? Actually, I think you kind of said something like that this morning in chapel, Chris. You said.
You have to remind me.
You said.
You're like,
What did I
I
say?
blacked out.
You said you don't even know how much God loves you, and to me that's kind of like just another way of looking at the same thing. It's like if you imagine like different dimensions and things that go above our understanding, how much more does love increase as we get to that? It's deeper than we could possibly fathom from our limited understanding of love, and we're the two-dimensional being trying to figure out what love is in our reality now.
Well, this is why I love...
Good point. It ties back to transposition.
Yes, it does. You do. I think my favorite argument for the existence of God, people may be weirded out by this, is the ontological argument. Plantinga's SR5 modal logic argument for the existence of God. If there is the greatest possible being and he can exist, then he exists in all worlds. If he exists in all worlds, he exists in this world. If he exists and then therefore he exists. The fact that you can conceive of the greatest possible being with great-making properties, a being in which there is no one greater, the fact that I can even conceive of this being is proof that he exists. And can he exist can you think of a possible world where he might exist? If you can say, yes, there is a possible world where the greatest possible being might exist, well, then he exists in all possible worlds because he's the greatest possible being. You couldn't think of a world you couldn't create a world where the greatest possible being couldn't exist. Therefore, he could exist in all possible worlds. This world is a possible world, so he could exist in this world. If he could exist in this world, therefore he does exist in this world, so God exists. And you look at this and you go, the fact that I, a temporal human being who's here, a speck of dust, for a brief minute of time, I can conceive of a metaphysical being beyond any possible experience that I can have. I can conceive of a being like this. Well, he's got to be greater than that. I'm using limited language, and yet I can conceive of something so great that I can barely hold it I can barely bring it in, grasp it in. The fact that I can do that is good evidence, transpositionally, that a God like that exists. Because he would have to exist. Because I can't think of a world where he couldn't exist. So he would have to exist. And to me, now that doesn't bring us to the Christian God, but that brings us to a divine, intelligent, an intelligent designer, at least. And so for me, all other things are off the table after that point, because it's actually, you actually cannot defeat the argument. It's an impossible argument to defeat, that the ontological argument. It's like the SR5 modal logic argument is really pretty much, it's impregnable.
Yeah, if you get it. A lot of people do not get it, and they mistake it for something else. Like
right.
the old French monk who talked, or what was his name, who like tried to beat Anselm's argument, original argument, or ontological argument, down with all those things, but he didn't get it.
Yeah.
And so it's like, it's very difficult to.
Once you grasp it, it's like you can't.
Yeah.
You're like you can't let go of it because it's so great. And I'm also reminded in the silver chair, if you guys remember. So the silver chair where Prince Rillian and Puddleblum and Jill, they're under
Eustace.
Eustace. They're under the influence of the
spell.
Yeah, the spell of the witch, and she starts saying, "You talk of the sky. There is no sky. Look, we have a dirt ceiling. That's what we have. There's no sun. We have lamps here, and we have all this." And
Aslan's probably just a cat.
Aslan's probably a cat. You've missed it. Lewis is so tight with his analogies. So he's bringing up transposition in the silver chair, teaching kids a transpositional truth, right there, or teaching anyone, not just kids, but teaching us a transpositional truth in a great analogy. And Puddleblum, who puts his feet in the fire to wake himself up for the dream, and he begins to say, even if Aslan isn't real, I still choose Aslan, because if you say it's a child's imagination to create a world where Aslan and skies and freedom, he goes, how can a child's imagination of the world trump your real world? Like, I choose his world because it beats your world every single day. Your world is trash compared to the world that can be imagined, and so therefore I choose that because it's way better than what you created for yourself. But the witch could only look at it transpositionally from a lower medium because that was where her power was. That was where her resources were located. So she had to go from that. Because if she went any further, then of course Rillian is a king and he's above her, and she loses her power and her authority and all of those things that come along with that. So,
but this is why we talk about this a lot. What we're talking about right now, but how many human beings say it doesn't make sense that God would be this way because this is how this works here on Earth, and I'm like, you can't compare existence here to the afterlife, and you can't, because we don't know what's coming. We don't know who. We think that we apply our logic to I don't know, God's omnipotence. I don't know what you would call it, but we act as if we have it all figured out, and we characterize God within our own understanding. And even
like atheists always go, well, God's a moral monster. And you just go, think God's the greatest possible being. And here's the other thing too, is we don't do, as David pointed out, we misrepresent based on our transpositional understanding. We misrepresent. And so when someone says the word God, the first thing you have to do is go, what do you mean by God? Do you mean a God you've created in your mind who was created? So a lot of times when you talk to people who are anti-theist, their God is a God who was created, a created God, either by man or he was a created being, and so therefore he's like Zeus. He's a God that has supernatural powers, but he has human flaws, and therefore he's a moral monster because he makes these decisions that we look at and say this is an immoral decision. But yet, how can we make a moral judgment when our morality comes from him? And now I jumped a bunch of steps there, but you can get there because transpositionally, if there is something above me, how can I therefore at a lower medium and a lower intellect and a lower everything judge something higher than myself, upon which God says, I am love, I am justice, I am truth. And I'm going to look at that thing and say, you're immoral. Like it doesn't line up because one, I've never experienced truth. in that degree. I've never experienced love. I've never had the experience to understand transpositionally what God is, other than saying He's the King of Kings. He is the greatest possible being. That's as close as I can get to nailing who God is. God is love. Well, what's love? The Greeks have 4 or 5 words for love, and so we all have this common objective. We're trying to go, you see it? It's this. And if we don't have the proper verbiage, if we don't have it put in a correct order, we don't have priority of information, we're going to come to incorrect conclusions. And so that's why it's so important. What Lewis here is breaking down is like, slow your thinking down. Slow your thinking down. Words, precision of language, right? He's talked about this. In all Lewis's writings, he's precise in his language. He says one thing, and then he breaks it down, so we know what he's talking about. He just doesn't say, God does this, because that's a trigger word. People are like, God, well, I have 100 thoughts about God. And none of those, even when Christians say, well, I believe in God, they may have created this theology that's so fragile that it can't withstand any critique. And then they're like, and then somebody's like, see, Christianity falls. You're like, well, that wasn't Christianity. That was an interpretation of something. That's why I think it's, Caitlin, there was this quote about Lewis talking about breaking down theology or breaking down his image of God.
My idea of God is not a divine idea. It has to be shattered time and time again, and he himself shatters it.
Yeah.
From Grief Observed.
Yeah.
Best book ever.
As we gain more information, Piaget says this. He says that when we're given new stimuli, new information, we have a choice. We weigh it out and test it. If it's bad, we ignore it and leave it out. If it's good, we assimilate it into our process of thinking. What happens is, the world's scary. It's uncertain. And if we can get to a place where we think we have our hands around it, we don't want to be back into a place where we're uncertain again in our teens and our 20s. And so we hold on to comfort and security, and we stop looking for truth. We have something that works. And then when God comes to us and gives us an experience which doesn't fit into our epistemology, we kick him out. Mm-hmm. That's why Lewis actually wrote Narnia, because he says, my own rebellious, watchful dragons would not allow me to engage God on the level I needed to engage him on. And so I needed to create an imaginative world where my dragon would sit down and be silent, and then I could engage with reason and ideas that I couldn't otherwise do. And so he wrote that because when you're in an imaginative world, you're in the atmosphere of the author. He creates an atmosphere, and then you go into it, and your dragon is tame and it's calm, and it's going, okay, this is intoxicating, this is magical. And so then they present you with reason, and then you can wrestle with it. And then you step back out into the real world, and you're like, oh, and then you see those analogies come to life. Chesterton talks about children grow up knowing evil, but when they see the dragon in a fairy tale, they go, aha, that's what it is. It's this thing. Oh, but I know there's a King George that can slay the dragon. And so it helps us put images to feelings and thoughts that we have.
Grief Observed. Great Divorce. I mean, how they apply their understanding of relationships, love, God, and how many of them choose to go back to hell because they've applied their own understanding of what love and redemption and forgiveness is, instead of accepting these light people, these light beings are saying, oh, you don't have to think anymore or figure things out anymore. Everything is known. But that doesn't make sense because we've never understood what that is.
It's also like in A Grief Observed, he talks about like what you're talking about now. He wrestles with it so much. There's so many things that he talks about that changed. Things that he like after H died, after Helen died, he talks about there's things that he had to let go that he's held on to like his whole life about beliefs of God. That's where that quote like came from. He was like, there's so many things that I didn't realize I was so naive to believe about God. And then another favorite quote that I love here that I was trying to figure it out when you were talking, and I finally remembered it. He says, this is something that he said was really hard for him to like grasp at the time, and he's like come to closure with it, I guess. Like had the dragon sit down and actually like think about it. He says, the more we believe that God hurts only to heal, the less we can believe that there's any use in begging for tenderness. And I just think about that, and it's like, you think when you're going through times of turmoil, you beg for tenderness because you expect that. Like we've always heard that's what you expect of God, is to give that to you. And he talks about, I think I read it to you the other day when we were here, where he says at the very end, after he sat down and actually wrestled with all of this, at the end of the book, he says, because at the beginning of the book, he talks about how you knock and the door shall be open. Like that's, everyone says knock and the door shall be opened. And he said, I've read that verse so many times, and I feel like every time I go to talk to God, the door is not only just shut in my face, it's like locked and bolted from the other side. But then when he gets to the end of the book, he said, that quote that was so good, I'll have to read it again, but he talks about how, it's not that the door was locked and bolted, is that I was screaming too loud for me to hear his voice, and he was like, I felt like I was the drowning man who can't be helped because he clutches and he grabs and he can't actually be helped. And so I think about that, and it just reminds me of what you said. After you sit down with things and like really wrestle through them and like have the dragon sit down before you can go through things, I don't know, it just really changes your perspective. And not many people will take time to do that, and then they'll move on to the next and to the next, and they never actually have any of their epistemology change throughout their entire lives. So. Because
our epistemology actually becomes an active reactive thing where I've talked about this many times, reflexive. We use the reflexive process only. Stimuli hits our brain, we automatically accept it or reject it. It's binary. It's accept it or reject it. But usually when stimuli comes in, we need to reflect on it and go, what do I do with this? Okay, this has good points, this has bad points. Okay, so let me take the good and then I'll get rid of the bad and keep some of the things in it. That's how the process should be. And Doyle gives us a great example of this in Scotland Yard and Lestrade and Watson and even the reader. You have all this information coming at you, and we automatically go, Butler did it, or we jump to the conclusion, and Holmes is like, wait. You missed this clue over here. You didn't see this drop of blood over here. This splatter could have only happened because of this, or this dust could have only been moved at this certain time. You're like, whoa, how did he do that? He's a genius. Well, he is a genius, but he studied and he put in the time to understand the world around him. We're in a reactive state where the world happens to us.
Yeah.
And we need to be in a state where we engage with the world.
So interesting. I had a conversation almost exactly like this, but I wasn't even thinking of transposition with a student. When I was leaving chapel today, it's a student that I know he's an Asbury student that's half Israeli. And I saw her as I was leaving chapel, started sitting. I was like, "Are you okay?" She's like, "Yeah." And she came. She just showed up at my studio. Laura was in there later, and she said, she started to explain that she woke up this morning and she just started weeping. And all through chapel, she just started weeping. And she says, I never cry. She goes, you know how many times I've cried in public? 0. She's like, I never cry. And I don't know. And it's not like I'm sad. I just don't know what's going on. And I'm obviously looking at her thinking, the Lord is moving on your life. Mm. You are like hungry for, she says she's hungry for the Lord. I said, the Lord is obviously moving on your life. I said, you need to slow down. Mm. You need to, rather than trying to explain this away, you need to go deeper. I said, you need to start asking the Lord questions. What does this mean? And start asking him for more, which is opposite than what many people just want to take control and I need to get control of myself. No, it's good. You need to actually go deeper. And I said to her, I think this is an invitation for you to go deeper. Mm-hmm. But she didn't understand what it meant because she's like, never shows emotion, period. She's like, I don't understand it. It's interesting. It just kind of hits me what you're talking about there.
Sounds like the
Israelites. That can be translated in most of the painful things in our life in some ways. It's always an invitation to go deeper. Mm-hmm. That's legit. Or if you're like Chidi, you have all this knowledge, and you have these two things, and then you just wrestle with it eternally, and never.
Seriously,
is that the show?
Yes,
yeah. The show that I'm not allowed to watch. You said not to watch it.
No, I think it's great to watch. I just didn't. They just messed up on the ending. I think it brings up a lot of cool questions to wrestle with. It's not a bad show.
It might drive you crazy.
You know this.
I like it when things challenge you.
I like being challenged and looking at things and go, where are they taking me with this? Because the thing is, you can't hide the football. If you start with a proposition, you've got to follow it out to its logical end, and they did, and it came up way short. But they were bringing up good questions along the way to wrestle with, and so you get to see the insight into their minds, into their wrestlings, and you get to go, okay, let's follow this out, and you're like, oh, that's where you took the detour. You went that direction. Like, oh no, this would have been the logical step. And so you see that, and that helps you go, yeah, I know if I'm following this, where not to go now. That's what it is. It's one of those things where, and then when you see someone going down that path, you can go, hey, yeah, this will lead to here. And then they may ignore you, or they may come back 6 months later and go, yeah, I logically went down that path, and yeah, that is the logical end of it. But it's good to be able to wrestle and find out there's one more way how not to get to God. There's one more way how not to do that. And so I'm never afraid of wrestling with those things because it's just one more way.
It's true. It gives you more opportunity to understand where other people are coming from too, and understanding. Like poor Chidi. There's a whole running joke through the whole series because he's a moral philosopher, and they're like, well, everyone hates moral philosophy teachers, and he's like, I know, but because they're constantly trying to find truth and what's the moral. Like he can't lie. So no matter, even if it's to demons, he can't lie to the demons, because he's struggling with this moral intrinsic thing for him. It's like, but it does bring up a lot of good.
Which means that morality actually is transcendent, and they've admitted as much in the show that morality is transcendent.
But then they amend their rules.
Well, you gotta watch it to find that out.
Yeah.
It's not that they amend.
That's not their main issue.
No. Yeah. There's reasons you're frustrated with the ending.
But it's so fun because I remember the first time I heard Richard Dawkins in the movie called Expelled. I heard the end of the movie because I used to be afraid of atheists because I was like, I don't know if I can speak. What if they're right? I mean, I was an atheist for several years, and maybe I missed something. Maybe these, because Richard Dawkins, these guys are brilliant men, and maybe I've missed something. And then I heard him say, they asked him a question. Well, if God doesn't exist, how do you think we got here?
He went through everything list. He's like, maybe crystals, maybe aliens.
And I went, that's your answer. Your knockdown argument is crystals or aliens. And I lost complete, there was no fear in that point.
But what did he say in the end? He said, basically, it was something to the effect of, if there is a God, then he doesn't care about me. It was.
Why did you hide yourself? He quoted Bertrand Russell. Why did you hide yourself so well? And you're like, ooh, that's a hurting person. Yes. That's rejection right there. I know that.
Years ago, we watched that and we're like, he's been wounded. He feels like.
And then you just turn around and say, why did you?
Doesn't that make you immediately not credible anymore? Whenever you're trying to argue
something
when you're not.
If you've learned to understand and think that way, but if you're just like most people and you're not really. You haven't even been introduced to that kind of thinking. You're just like, yep, that makes sense. If there's a God, he sucks. So either way, it's the worst, And
the hard part about this, I guess I'm getting old. Because I feel like the old guy that when I hear that, I'm like, no, you suck. He's like, you don't do anything right. You don't love people well, and you're getting mad at God for something, and you can't even love your mother well. That's what I think when I hear that. I'm like,
oh my God.
When you love your mother well, come back and we'll talk about
that. That's the rough answer nobody wants.
It's true.
And so people say, well, why did God kill people in the Old Testament? I'm like, listen, if God is divine and omniscient, and he knows everything, and he controls everything, and he created us, and he brought us into this world, he literally can't take us out at any point when he wants he doesn't need our permission to take us out for any reason. That's not a clean answer, but that's a logically consistent answer. If he created you and gave you the gift of life, then at any moment he has the right to take that away. Mm-hmm. You didn't earn it, you didn't deserve it, so therefore you have no rights to it.
Again,
also, you don't exist without him, which means your existence is contingent upon him.
Yes.
Thus, you have... because you owe everything to him, there is nothing that you can say you deserve.
Again, we're basing our understanding of eternity and God on what we understand.
We make an image
our limited epistemology. We're throwing at God and saying, "You can exist here." It's like you can't hold your hands up without me telling you, letting you do that. All right, I'm going to jump real quickly. Just a few things here. We're going to skip most of the next one, but I just wanted to throw this out to you, artists. Pictures are part of the visible world themselves and represent it only by being part of it. Pictures are a part of the visible world themselves and represent it only by only being a part of it. Pictures are transpositional expression of communicative desires and epistemology, but actually they are transpositional themselves because they are part of the visual that helps you transposition and create. It's like Inception right there. Suddenly just like...
Well, it's like, this is what I said in the figure drawing class. I said, we're drawing, because today was portrait day, so we had 2 different models come in with lighting on them and drawing them. I said, you're trying to draw, and what messes them up is they're trying to draw features, and I'm like, listen, all you're drawing is light and dark. It's like, if there's no light, you see nothing. If the light is not here, shining down, there is nothing to see. It's darkness. But all you're drawing is light, and it's interesting because you're drawing the light. Now I'm confusing myself.
No, that's good. I'm following you.
I'm confusing myself.
He's like, guess what he got? Now
like,
we're
I
stopping. Wait,
my
get back on the
brain's
thread.
you've been
I
up
feel
too
like you're
long.
right here, and I'm so into it. I'm gonna keep going. It's good.
He's like, crap.
You've been doing lots
That
of
happens
speaking
to me
today.
a lot.
I've been doing a lot of speaking today.
That's right.
It made sense for
4
10
hours
seconds.
straight of
Now
critique
I've
after
lost myself. We
More
got where
coffee.
you're going.
Yes.
Enough to give the information.
So how did they react to that? How did they respond to that?
Well, what I like to see is I like to see a breakthrough. And one of my students, he's a Chinese student, suddenly started drawing better. Something happened where they're looking at the features. Say, I'm like looking at you, and they're like, most people when they draw it like it's Mr. Potato Head. That's what I say. It's like, let's throw a nose on here. Let's throw an eye. I think that when the face is whole, it's like, it's a unified structure. And I said, just draw, look at, this is what I did, is I took a picture of the model, and then I went back and I edited it and put it in black and white, and then I put, you do markup, and I said, here, look. And I drew a line around the shadow shape and did it, and they were like, oh, let's just do that. And then they did it, and then suddenly the drawings came out better.
I feel like when you're in art school, when it really clicks, when you have your first breakthrough, is when you know you're not drawing anything that's actually 3-dimensional. You're drawing light and dark. Like when you learn when you're like doing any kind of figure drawing, when that clicks in your brain. I think I was like in high school, and my art teacher kind of did the same, like similar thing. It changed my whole. I became like a million times better drawer after that, because you don't notice, you don't start looking at features anymore like you did. When I look at a person, I look at their features. You look at their eyes, their nose, their mouth. When you're drawing something, you don't look at that. You look at like parts, even like weird parts. Like you look at this. Like when I first start drawing like a portrait, I always look at here. I don't know why. I just always start looking at the indentions of their temples first, and like you just never know stuff like that until you start like really get into drawing, and someone tells you that.
It's difficult to teach it, and it's like you talked about watchful dragons. You talked about that.
Wes.
When you're trying to get somebody to understand what it's strange, is that people see all the time, and they think they understand what they're seeing, but if you tell them, here's a piece of paper, could you translate that? Then suddenly their first grade self comes out, and they're like, tree equals broccoli.
They also draw like this with their fist.
They do that stuff, but what I've come to find out is that it's like the watchful dragons is what you think things mean. In observation, if I think this is a microphone, or if I I look at Caitlin's like, oh, it's a face with eyes, I need to draw the eyes, because the eyes are experientially overweighted, because we look at each other in our culture in the eyes, so they psychologically feel bigger than they really are, because we look at each other in the eyes, not on the forehead. If I look at your forehead,
You're like, oh, forehead, just draw a little square up there.
yeah. And so I say to them, it's like, if you can deal with everything in the world as abstraction and deal with it as if it's just not a thing, not like you can extract the meaning of things, the subjects of things, and you just deal with it honestly in an analog fashion, then you come back around to it, and it will actually become what you think it wants to become.
Now you got me thinking about like, I wonder maybe I could draw.
Of course you can draw. Of course you can.
Drawing can be taught. I'm such a
Drawing
believer in
can be
that.
taught. Drawing can
All
be
of a sudden
taught.
it's
I
like,
think the difference
I've
is
got like
people,
Salvador
it's just
Dali
like,
experience.
Just like sports,
amazing,
like there's natural athletes and there's people who work so hard and become incredible athletes.
Larry Bird.
There you go. I think art is the same way. Like there's people who like you can go look at a third grade art class and be like, that person's definitely more naturally gifted.
That person
they have
has
an eye
perception.
for it. Like perception. That's all it is.
Yeah.
But you can teach people. I read this book once on figure drawing when I was really getting into that in high school. And it was about this sorry, it was way off topic, but there was this man who used to be like an FBI agent. He used to draw like sketches, of like criminals. I don't know what that's called again, but just like in criminology, he would draw sketches.
Forensic artist.
Yeah, it's like forensic. Yeah, like a forensic artist, and he used to do that. And he went to art school, and then, just randomly went on and said, I want to get into like law enforcement. And so this is what he did. And he loved it. And he was a detective. And then he decided to retire and become an art teacher, like an art professor, and teach, he wanted to teach everyone that you can draw even when you think you can't. So that was like the highlight of the class is don't think you can draw, you can. And so he had all these people come in, and it showed them drawing a person, like just, across the, like sitting across them, drawing them. And they are the worst. I mean, they are worse than what people I know could draw in third grade. I mean, they're so bad. And these people tried so hard. And by the end of the class, it wasn't even that like a semester-long class. These people were drawing real, accurate-looking portraits. I mean, they weren't, hyper-realistic or anything by no means, but they were still beautiful portraits. And I've always told people that. I tell people that, I'm like, you can learn. It's all about process. Someone has to, as soon as it clicks in your brain what you're really doing.
Mine look like more like
so
nightmares when I draw people.
It's interesting, the process of getting her through it, though. It's like something about this this chapter reminds me of it, because you just can't directly get there. There's a way that's like indirect, and it requires a level. This is what I think. Drawing, like a lot of observational art requires. I know we're getting off topic here, but it's like it requires a level of faith. It's like film. It's like you gotta get people to suspend their unbelief that they're looking at a two-dimensional screen, and you have to suspend that belief for a moment and just give themselves over that you are in three dimensions, right? There's some part of it where it's like you have to suspend your unbelief that if I don't draw this in the way that I think this should be drawn, it won't come out. But if you just give me what you got. Anyways.
It's so good.
I'm getting lost.
I think it's so great. It goes perfectly with transposition. I think it really does tie
I'm glad
together.
you think so, because I'm like, wait a minute, does this go
No, it doesn't. It reminds me of Leaf by Niggle too. It reminds me of the
starting to
process,
explode.
the
Yes.
growth that you go through to understand transposition. That's why I love how Lewis like walks you through the beginning of like the easier things to understand. Like even going back to glossolalia when we talked about that, there's a reason for that, and then he lines it up. Like, I'm following you. As soon as you think you're about to miss it, he gives you like some kind of example that like brings you back in a little, and then he right now is
Or
just
you're like,
hits
oh,
you with
he should
it.
have talked about this. Oh wait,
He's about to.
He's about to.
His timing's perfect, right?
I get ahead of him all the time.
Yes.
I'm like, oh, but that's a really obvious one right here, and then he comes back like 2 paragraphs later.
You
I'm
hear
like,
him
oh, yeah,
whispering
you got that.
from the heavens,
Yeah.
patience,
Yeah,
child.
Yes.
patience. Just
We're almost
You
there.
hear Lewis say patience.
let me do it. Let me work.
It'll be the day.
I think about this all the time because, the saints, they're more alive than we are. I'm like, is Lewis listening to this conversation? I'm like,
Well, it's funny you said
I don't
those
know.
words because
Probably
in
got
A
that
Grief
context,
Observed,
too.
he says at the end that he feels like God is, when he says the door is no longer bolted and shut now, I feel like I don't get an answer from God anymore, but it's not a, how does he explain it? It's not a like hasteful or like a bad type of ignore. He's not ignoring him. He said, I don't feel like God's ignoring me. He just has a blank stare at me, and he's just saying, peace, child, you just don't understand. And I was like, whoa, that was good that you just said that because, whew,
it's all good. He's more like a hippie now.
it's all good.
You'll get it soon.
Well, if we, there is a poem that I wrote, Amnesiac, where after this person goes through much suffering, it's a 4-part series of poem. When he gets to the end, and he's sitting on the sea of forgetfulness is what it's alluding to. His feet's in the water, and somebody walks up to him, and a man walks up to him. And he asks him how long he's been there. And he goes, I don't know. For before, he was condemning Jesus. He was accusing. But then when the question is, how long have you been here? He's like, I don't know. I forget. And then Jesus sits down beside of him, and they laugh. And that's the whole conversation. But it was, what I was trying to get to in that was, when we go through the suffering, and once we come out the other side and we understand who he is, and we don't see through the glass darkly, Paul says that the glory is not even yet come into our, we'd be willing to go down and face way more than we did when we see what's on the other side of this.
For the
I
joy
find-
set before.
I find that comforting, though. Like, I think a lot of people find that scary. Like, we don't know. We don't understand. We have no idea. But I find it comforting because I get frustrated sometimes because I don't understand and I don't know. But then it's like, if I can wrap my mind around the fact that God does understand and he does know and that there are greater things ahead, I feel that childlike faith of like, oh, my Father knows and I can trust him and he's going to give me the information when I need it. And that gives me comfort.
Maybe you don't want the information. This is something that I like.
Well, I think that's true also. Like, Corey
Today has enough trouble of its own. Do I
Right.
really want to know? It's like,
Corey Ten Boom talked about, like, she was on the train with her father.
the grace ticket.
She was on the train with her father, and she had heard a conversation about sex, and she, I can't remember how she said it, but she asked her father, "What is sex?" or something like that, and he's like, "Corey, can you go grab the suitcase for me?" And it was way too heavy for her, and she tried, and she couldn't carry it, and he's like, "Just like I know that you can't quite carry this yet because you're not ready. Your father knows when you're ready to understand these and what to learn about these things, and I'll give you the information when you're ready to learn and understand here." And Corey, likened that, of course, to what she learns with her Heavenly Father, and how he gives us the information we need when we need it. Because if we knew some of the things, I was just reading today, one of our friends, not close friend, but they had a baby a year ago and just turned a year old, and had a lot of medical issues, and she's like, if I had known what the next 365 days would hold, 17 diagnoses for my baby and 9 specialists and 7 hospital stays and all this, she's like, I don't think I could have bore that knowledge, but God's grace didn't allow me to know all the things that were going to come, and we could take it one thing at a time. And I don't know what that has to do with everything we're talking about, but again, the not understanding and knowing, but...
Well, I think it has to do with we're trying to express something in suffering. Viktor Frankl says that we have a pain box, and one drop of suffering fills up the entire pain box, but it cannot become full. It can withstand any amount of suffering, but one drop is equal to 1,000,000 drops of suffering.
Wes was saying today, like the world, like we were talking about this. Why is it today everyone thinks this is the worst time in not everyone, but people are like, this is the worst time in history. I'm like,
so
I feel
stupid.
like the
It's
people
like
who walked
the
through the
stupidest thing I've
Holocaust
ever heard.
would disagree with that, who were placed in prison camps and other times in other places that were horrible. I said, and Wes was saying this, like, how can people say this is the worst time? And I'm like, because suffering fills up the room. It's because it's our experience, and what we suffer. That's what Viktor Frankl was talking about. You over here could have like stubbed your toe, and it's the worst thing that happened to you in the day, and that was your suffering. And then I could have lost a parent, and I'm suffering. We feel suffering. Now the world's going to look at it and say that's not the same, but we both feel this suffering deeply because it's our experience. It's what we understand and what we know. And I think that's why the world now, we're like, this is the worst period in history ever.
And so if you have the wrong information, and you've said it in the wrong order, then you're going to come to the wrong conclusion, and you may actually self-inflict suffering where it actually is not, because you've misinterpreted.
Or if you have too much information, which is I think one of the reasons we have so much depression nowadays, is because we have too much. We know too much about what's going on everywhere at all times in everybody's lives, and we're not made for that. We're not made that. We're biologically not designed to know many more people outside of a small community in which we live.
So true.
And when we get all this information we can't handle, we think the world's going to hell. But that's because we're not God, and we can't see all of it at once and see the threads that are continuing on to something greater. And it's like that's one of the main issues with social media is that, and we see all this coming at us, and that's why I think it's so good to just take it a little bites at a time. And there's plenty of good to be found in it, but if you take too much of it, if you read the news too much, goodness.
Because you feel everyone. I mean, Wes was saying to me the other day. He's talking to me, and he's like, "Nina, you take on too many people's pain." Because,
she's an empath.
I never was an empath back in the day. I've become an empath, and I feel all this pain from different people, and sometimes it's just people in my life when they're going through things, and I hurt for them, and I'm like angry that they're feeling these things. But then I have not only that, the people in my life, our circle that we're supposed to have, but then you see the pain of others out in social media. You see the wrongs that are being, inflicted on people, or suffering being inflicted on people. And for me, sometimes I'm like, oh, it's too much. I can't take all this in. And
you can't.
So you're right. You're right. We weren't meant to absorb all of this.
It's That's why I do daily news blasts. I do one daily news blast and then I'm done. I don't look at the news anymore.
See, I don't even do news blasts. I just see
Didn't
stuff
we
on
talk
social
like
media.
this summer? Like I feel like we were outside or something. We talked this summer about like the like this current generation that's in college right now, like why they're so anxious and so like overwhelmed because they grew up with the social media, and that's like it's like the high school hallway. And they never
Right.
leave it
What we see
because
in the
social
movies.
media is the high school hallway, and so they don't ever
Sounds like a
go
horrible
home
dream.
and like get
And yet it's never ending, and it's in
Oh,
real
yeah.
life.
Yep.
And when you hear students talk, it's like, I'm sorry, are you the president of the United States? Are you the head of the UN? And there's all these problems in this country. I was like, you can't even afford the plane ticket to that country, and you're thinking. No, I'm just thinking like you can't even, and you're trying to take on the burdens of like. I challenge students. I was like, why don't you stop worrying about other countries and just ask the Lord, what is He doing in my hall?
Yeah.
Lord Jesus, show me what you're doing in your hall, and then He'll show you. He'll give you a vision of what's going on, and then be responsible for what's in your realm of like influence. That's it.
If you do well enough there, then you can.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I mean, even Jordan Peterson talks about in his book, 12 Rules for Life, his first rule is make your bed. Because he said, if you can't handle simple problems, what makes you think you can take on complex problems like foreign diplomacy or even domestic diplomacy? What makes you think you can fix Medicare if you can't make your bed, if you can't clean your room? Because once you start to clean, he says, so what you do is you clean your room. And then once you get your room clean, then you beautify it, because it's nice to have something beautiful in your house. One room you can go to where all the stress is off and it's beautiful to look at. It lifts your spirits.
It's called the bathroom.
Well, then you could beautify your house. And then if your neighbors see a beautiful house that comes by, that lifts their spirits and gives hope. And then they beautify their house. And there's one else beautiful. And suddenly you've created a wave, an attractive wave of hope, all because you started cleaning your room. You took care of a simple thing, and it becomes more complex. He says, but you can't take on UN issues if you can't even take care of budgeting your money and taking care of things like that. And so it's.
See, that's why I want our house to be so clean all the time.
Is that
Give
it?
people hope.
That's awesome.
I feel like there's something else there.
We've solved it. We've solved a marriage crisis here.
Oh
Well, didn't Mother Teresa say something like, if you want to change the world, go home and love your family?
Yes.
Was it Mother
Yep.
Teresa?
Mm-hmm. She did say that. That's what she said.
She loves some children, man.
And she also said to Bill Clinton when she met him, she said, "Give me your babies you want to abort. I will take every one of them."
Oh my gosh! Wow, she said that.
Yes, she said it to his face, it was like in a public thing. She's like, "Give me all your babies. I will take all of them."
She wouldn't even do war protests and all that kind of stuff. She said, "Give me a pro-peace rally. I'll go to that. I'm not going to go to an anti-war protest." I mean, if you go to her home in India, it's her home. I mean, her place where she started her work. I mean, it says, "Jesus, help me to pray the work." Everything was about loving others.
That's good.
Well, even like this, one of the people we just interviewed for our documentary at the end of last year he has like dedicated his life to this community in Indianapolis, and he was talking about how like one of the problems that is coming out of the like zero waste sustainability movement is that people become experts on sustainability, and then they think they can just go into any community and say, you need to do this, 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 and this, and that'll solve your problem, without understanding anything about that community, knowing their specific needs, living there,
It's
listening.
like Missions 101, really.
Yeah, exactly. And
It's like, I'm going to go to the community and give them a bunch of money.
It's like that could do them
You've
way
just
more.
destroyed the community because now they no longer trust each other.
It's like that book. What's it called? When
Helping
When
Hurts.
Helping Hurts. Yeah.
There's a lot of good stuff in there.
yeah.
No, that's good.
You know what I think is so funny is how this reminds me so much. I feel like this and Weight of Glory go hand in hand, but it's like that two sides of the same coin thing we talked about, because I feel like we can read Weight of Glory and feel so full of, wow, like we can't contain the weight. How beautiful is that? But then when we hear we can't contain the weight of the bad, we're like, whoa, I want to understand the bad. Like, I want to be able to hold that. You know, it's just funny how our ideas, the way we think about each one is so differently. Like, I think about even the way, if you go back and listen to when we talked about Weight of Glory, it was and seen in such a different light. Like both of these were fascinated by, but that one was like, wow, this is so beautiful. We can't hold it. Like we can't see, it's like whenever David was like going on the rock, but that is so incredible. Like what an epiphany. And then here we talk about the same thing, very similar, but how like we're too small in our limitations. We can't hold, the bad things that are happening. We can't understand them, but we still argue with God constantly. We're still trying to figure out why can we not hold this, but yet we're okay with the other side.
Or like,
of
give
it.
us all the bad stuff.
Like it doesn't make any sense.
Let's take it all on.
Like the way that we perceive
But
each
we
one
can't
of
take
those.
on the good.
So I think you could
Yeah.
even look at this as weight of glory being the divine perspective of us, and that transposition is the Adamic perspective. It's we are looking at it from the lower medium,
Right.
and so he's presenting our argument,
Yeah, exactly.
and in weight of glory he's presenting God's argument.
That was
And
was
so I
very
think that's-
perceptive. That was
Yeah.
really good.
Yes, that
Caleb.
was.
Yeah.
You better write that down.
write down
I
your
can't
thought,
write down
please.
my own thoughts. You guys have to remember those. If I say anything
No.
good, just hope you remember
You write
it.
down what you just said.
Just write down what you just said.
Don't think about what we're saying right now. Write down what you said.
Transposition and weight of glory are the flip side of the same coin. Both of them are talking about human limitations.
And yet,
Weight of
human-
glory has more hope.
and yet we have a harder time accepting it.
Yes, in transposition, because it talks about the bad stuff and it talks about our limitations,
Yet we
We
try to
wrestle
take
with
on
it
more of
more.
it.
Right.
we understand that from divine perspective, God's like,
And we
you
complain
can't
about
because
it.
it would crush
We
you.
complain
And
about
here
it
we're going,
constantly.
ugh, I want it.
Yeah.
But
Exactly.
but I can't
we
I
take
can't
on the
get there.
suffering. We're
And
like-
so we see our limitations so clearly here, and it's limitations to information. It's almost like this is the temptation of the garden, right?
Yeah.
The knowledge. It's like this will make you wise. And we hear transposition, we go, we can have the bit of information we need that might make us a little better because we're not in that dimension. But God says in Weight of Glory, what Lewis is saying is, you can't have more of me because it would crush you. But on this side, we're going, but I want that little bit more. And so that's the
Exactly.
that's
I
the,
think
the
we
tension.
understand suffering, though. We understand sin.
Mm-hmm.
We understand darkness. We fall into it again and again, and I think that's like part of the when we talk about the goodness, none of us feels worthy of all the goodness, and we don't understand what it is to be, because that's like divine and fully and so good. I take on the weight of the world, and it makes me sad.
And so the Adamic perspective is most people, where God's saying you can't handle me because it would crush you, they're like, okay, well then you don't exist because I can't have all of you, I can't have everything. Then I ignore what I can't have as non-existent because I can't have it.
And
So
yet
it might as
God-
well not exist.
And yet God is no good because the world is so bad.
Right. Although everything, so who?
But it's not all. That's the thing that I don't
Yes.
understand. It's not
here,
that.
Here comes the curmagin.
Well, no.
He's not. You're dumb.
I stupid. So this guy named Peter Crone, we're listening to this guy. He's in a movie called Heal. But Peter Crone was talking about that there actually is no objective suffering. Suffering only exists in mindfulness and consciousness.
Oh, super fascinating. My brain was starting
And
to
Wait,
kind
say
of
that one more time.
Suffering doesn't
But then I'm
exist
like, oh,
objectively.
wait, this makes sense.
Yeah.
Suffering only exists in mindfulness and consciousness. Because it only happens to humans. Like it only happens in the conscious sentient beings. They can only suffer because of the way that our limitations and our epistemology in our consciousness, we feel and we engage and we have suffering because we are conscious. If we weren't conscious, we wouldn't have suffering. It wouldn't be there. So suffering is not something that's objective in that sense. It's something that is happening to us consciously, but yes, has physical ramifications. Yet has
You're talking about something beyond physical suffering, because I feel like animals can definitely suffer.
they're sentient. I'm saying sentient beings can suffer.
Sentient beings. Okay, gotcha.
So I changed that. So let's take this for him. So if you what we call suffering, let's just say what we call suffering, your water heater breaks, your car breaks down in the same week, right? And you're feeling all this pressure. You're going to lose your house. You're going to lose all these things. Now, that's suffering, and we take that because it begins to put stress on the body, and we begin to feel the physical outer workings of our conscious mind thinking about these thoughts. But let's say your water heater breaks down. Just say that one right there, and you're like, why does everything bad happen to me? And you start in this downward spiral of negative thought process because I don't really have the money, I don't have this. What if there's another way to look at that? What if you go, I wonder, and your water heater guy comes by and he's like, man, I really needed this. We were a little short on funds. And you're like, oh, I get a chance. Things break, and that gives somebody else a job to help fix it. What if there was another way to look at that where it's not suffering, but you're actually being a part of the solution by something that you would normally call suffering happening to you? It's a shift. It's a mind shift in that.
To bring it back to Harry Potter.
This is the Harry Potter group.
You have Harry Potter. You have Snape.
Ooh, yes.
Both come from awful backgrounds, horrible backgrounds, mistreated, abused, neglected. Now, one would say that Snape was quite the hero, but we can all agree Snape was a jerk. He was, in essence, he was a jerk. He was a wounded jerk, and there was reasons, but one of them chose a different path. One became the savior of the wizarding world. You could argue Snape was also, but his character was completely bitter and angry his whole entire life. So I think that's we talk about this a lot because I used to get really upset, which a lot of us do. One thing happens, 2 things happen in the morning, 3 things happen, and all of a sudden, because 3 things happen, we're like, oh, it's definitely one of those days. And that's within the first hour of the day, and we still have 13 more hours.
Let's cash it in, go back to bed.
Right, still have 13
Reset.
more hours, but because
speculations.
We spilled milk. We stained our clothing. We got to get a new outfit, whatever.
Flat tire.
Flat tire happens,
Yes.
and all of a sudden, for some reason, we look at that
We
as
missed
bad.
the boat.
And so that used to really build up for me, and I would feel like it's that almost like that self pity comes in. This
karma.
day, not karma, but like that. It's just we get into the negative mindset, and so the last
Enemies
year,
after me.
the enemy. Sometimes
Or
it's
other
always
drivers are after me.
What?
Yes.
Other drivers are after me.
Christians become the enemy's really attacking my heart, and I'm like, what if sometimes we just spill a glass of whatever on the floor, and sometimes what if we look at it an entirely different way? And that's what's been super freeing for me this last year and a half, as we've gone through a lot more meditation, being intentional about how we speak about anything. And now, and I think I've shared this before, but when these things are happening now, I'm like our car has broken down and had problems a million times this year. I have not been stressed about it at all. It's kind of there's nothing I can do about the car breaking down. It's happened. Do we have the money? I don't know.
We have older
coming from
cars, so
somewhere.
it's going to start.
I'm there.
So I could spend my time being upset about it, but I always tell the kids, what's that going to do? How is that going to help the situation? And I used to think there was no way to not feel that. But then the more and more we begin to practice gratitude and thankfulness, and saying, our brother Gautam in Nepal, he's always, I share this all the time. He's like, what a wonderful time to trust God more. Oh, thank you, God, for giving us opportunity to trust you more. And it always puts me to shame.
Oh, wow. That makes me want to.
Yeah, because he was completely cut off from all of their support, and now they have, they had 12 children they're caring for, an entire community around them, people that live in their home, and then all of a sudden all of their funding is cut off.
Let's see where the money will come from.
And he's like,
Let's see. It's a wonderful
this,
surprise.
He's like, this is a wonderful opportunity to trust God more. Instead of looking at it as, oh, the enemy has attacked us, because the enemy can't take anything from you.
Your mind.
You can't take anything here. And but the perspective, we have control over it. And so it's been very freeing to walk through that too, and realize we're not. It's all about how we see it.
I also think of Nelson Mandela and prison for 27 years, and he came out not angry. And so anytime I want to hold something against somebody,
Think of Nelson Mandela.
and you go, this guy sat in a 6x6 prison cell for 27 years and thought about Invictus and says, they can't get in here. You don't own my mind. I'm free in my mind every day. And I'm going, and I get upset with somebody because
And
they
let them control so much of your
and they control my
emotions.
day, and they turn my day into
And they actually
into
don't
bitterness.
control it. We're just
We let
allowing,
them.
And we
we're
let
allowing.
I let them have free
We're
space in my
falling
mind. I'm
apart.
going,
They haven't done
why would I
exactly.
do that? And so now it's I don't hold anything against anyone. It's
That's what we hear from
that's fine.
Holocaust
That's fine.
survivors. A lot of
Yeah.
Holocaust
That's true,
survivors.
you do,
This
yeah.
they couldn't take this, and I'm like,
They would have taken mine.
It's like, yeah,
a lot of
how can you be
people-
that strong
A
in
lot
your
of
mind?
people did succumb to
do.
that.
It's
right?
crazy.
There are a lot of people who didn't.
It's
For
funny
me,
that
the way I've been trying lately is just to try to when I get to that point when it gets into me, I try to view things or view people, especially with the eyes of God, and then it how does he see them in this situation? And then when I imagine that, it
Yeah.
starts to open it up, and I actually, sometimes the people who make me the most angry, I end up pitying.
Yes.
Well, that guy, that doctor he was talking about, he shared a story of how he was literally like late for something. He was going like 85 down the highway in California, and he said driving down a highway fast, and a guy hit him from behind. He's like, so that means this guy's like at least going 90, 95 or more. And, they pull off to the side. And he said, my first reaction could have been like, F you, what is going on? Anger, all this. And what he does is he gets out of the car and he says, are you okay?
Yeah.
And then instead of, he's like, he made a point to say, he's like, I'm not saying people shouldn't go unpunished or anything like that, but the guy had been drinking. And then he's like, you know what, why don't we meet next week?
He was late to work. His marriage was falling apart. He was just spiraling hard.
And so he starts meeting with this guy instead of choosing to, call the police, all this, which, again, he said, I'm not saying people should not be punished for their actions. He's like, this was just one of those moments I felt this is what was supposed to happen. Mm-hmm. And he's like, because I love people, and I know that sometimes if we were just given a chance, it could change everything. It's like, sliding doors. But, and he started meeting, and then that guy's marriage started to get better, and he got a job that he probably wouldn't have gotten had he gone to jail and all this stuff. And, the opportunity to look at a person differently. Because my immediate response would be like, justice!
No, same. Amy would say, scream justice.
Well,
justice, you deserve jail.
Betsy,
You could kill people, because it's true. That's why he said, he's like, I'm not saying drunk drivers should get away with, without jail.
It just shouldn't
time,
be your
but-
first I think his point's probably it shouldn't be your first.
And
go-to.
it's not every situation.
Betsy
sometimes-
Tenboom watched, and
Corey
with
Ten
Corey,
Boom's sister.
Corey Tenboom's sisters, watching a woman get beat in the yard by a Nazi guard, and she says, "What she say that
She says to Corey, she's like, that poor woman.
That poor
and Corey's
woman.
like, yes, that poor woman. And then
the one
Corey's
getting
like,
beat."
Corey's like, oh, my sister's talking about the SS guard. She's not talking about the woman being beaten.
Wow.
Because Betsy looked at the woman beating
So she has
the
way
prisoner.
more problems.
She
than
said that
this one
woman
does.
obviously does not know the love of Christ. If she
Oh,
did,
it
she
gives me
would never beat someone like that. Yes, of
What-
course, there's pity for the woman being beaten, but man,
What kind of
different.
darkness do you have to have in your heart to be able to do that? What kind of twistedness is in there?
This is why Corey Ten Boom and her sister inspire me all the time. My faith heroes, along with C.S. Lewis.
It's funny too what we think about, because we think about like in this situation with other people, you think about like your perspective change, but I think we don't do it even with ourselves. Like the other day I was talking to my mom and I was just like been in a bad headspace and been so negative, Nancy, and just the whole thing of just I was just struggling for like a week. And I was like, I just need to get my life together. Like you were saying earlier, I just need to get myself together. I need to get control of my life because I'm letting other people dictate my
I see
emotions.
that.
And that, letting other people have that kind of control over me bothers me in itself. So then it's like a downward spiral because I'm mad, I'm already upset, and then I'm even more upset because I'm letting them make me upset. And so this is like my 8 thoughts. That are
Right.
like, I'm letting someone else have this power over me and I shouldn't do that, but how do I stop it? And so I was just really struggling, and I told my mom, she said something so random. She's like, you need to get in the gym. What? I need to get in the gym. She was like, when you do something like that, when you take control of something you can take control of, it'll start changing your mindset. And she was like, you will feel confident again, and you will realize that you have power more than you think, just based on going and doing something physical with, because I told her, I was like, I can't go to the gym right now. Like, I'm mentally not there. I'm tired. I'm weak emotionally. I'm weak mentally. And she was like, that's exactly why you need to go. Like, that's why you need to go do that. And it was just so cool because it just changed my mind about it, about, maybe I should go and like just get, like she said, just helps you get a hold on things.
And that's a lesson usually
really
takes people a whole lot longer to learn.
It was really, really good. I was like, wow, Mom. Like sometimes she says things like that. I'm like, where's this coming from?
Nuggets.
You got some wisdom nuggets she's throwing at me. And it really is true because you go and you're like, even if you don't do anything but just go for a little run or whatever, I'm like, wow, I do have control of myself way more than I thought I did.
I need to run
It's good.
one of these years.
One of these days.
One day
That's
I'm gonna
the
run.
problem.
It's good.
Well, I think next time I'm going to finish Transposition. I'm just going to pull out quotes that we have so we can actually get on to Flatlands, because I don't know that we'll get finished with this.
You better get the good one that I read that I posted about on our Instagram. Everyone on the podcast needs to go follow our Instagram.
Yes, follow our Instagram at Verum_Fabula_Fellowship. And please follow us. The podcast is also anywhere you get podcasts. You're listening to this, of course, you already know where to get it. But you can tell your friends to also look for it at any podcast medium or platform. Verum Fabula Fellowship Review. It's a mouthful, but it is accurate, what we do. So thinking about transposition, and I think at the end here what we've given is real-world examples of how we engage with information and how the way we view it and how we engage with it epistemologically determines how we view and think about higher thought. So our actions are determined by the way we think of our transpositional information and stimuli that comes in. And the thought that keeps coming back is, my idea about God is not a divine idea, and he keeps breaking it over and over and over again. And we must be willing to be broken. Lewis says that if we search for comfort, we will find neither comfort nor truth. If we search for truth, we may well find both. And I think that's what we're trying to do in the scripture. We're trying to find truth. And we know in order to find truth, we must have a priority of information. In order to have a priority of information, we must look for the clues in the right place. If transposition teaches you nothing, it teaches you that there is a right and a wrong way to look at things. And that there is, maybe go a little further, there is a more correct way to look at things and a less correct way to look at things. Asking better questions. So I always say there are 3 reasons why Sherlock Holmes is the greatest detective and actually his methods can be duplicated. Number 1, he studied. He spent so much of his time studying. He studied. You can study. You can actually go to any kind of resource. You can actually look up information. As David said, we have too much information, so you can actually find resources. The second thing is he thought. And that's the most important thing. He actually thought. He would take all of his clues and he would line them up and go, he'd follow out logically and go, nope, that didn't work. Nope, that didn't work. Nope, that didn't work. Aha, this one actually this might work. This one might work. Nope, that one didn't work. And because he studied and thought, he was able to see clues that others missed, but they were always in an obvious spot. Doyle never hid the ball from anybody. Just like the ball is never hidden. The scripture says that the invisible things of God are clearly seen through creation. No one's hiding the ball here. You have to be able to see the clues correctly to understand what you're seeing. If you look from a lower medium only, then you're not going to attach the right value. You'll see the right angle, and you'll just think it's a right angle, and you won't know that it's actually talking about a road or talking about a dunce's cap. You'll miss the other values that need to be added to it. And so I think what we're talking about here at the end here is exactly how we are applying our transpositional information in our journey, in our quest for truth. So that's all we have for tonight. We will be back on Monday, and since Randy's not here, we're going to say our mantra.
Chill first.
Further up.
Further in.